The tapestry of any profound movement is woven from the threads of countless individual lives, each contributing its unique hue and strength. In the foundational years of the Unification Church, a spiritual wave that emerged from the crucible of post-war Korea, one such thread, strong and remarkably steadfast, belonged to Young Kim. While the towering figure of Reverend Sun Myung-moon naturally commands the spotlight, it was the unwavering dedication, quiet sacrifice, and profound faith of early disciples like Young Kim that truly forged the bedrock upon which a global movement would rise. His story is not merely a chronicle of events. It is a testament to the power of conviction, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative potential of a life dedicated to a higher purpose. In order to understand Young Kim, one must first understand the Korea into which he was born and came of age. It was a land scarred by colonialism, devastated by war, and yearning for spiritual solace and national identity. It was amidst this landscape of profound suffering and fervent hope that the seed of a new revelation, championed by Reverend Moon, began to take root, largely thanks to the unwavering commitment of individuals who saw in his teachings a path to redemption for themselves and for the world. Young Kim was not just a follower. He was a pioneer, an architect, and a silent guardian of the nascent unification movement, his life intricately intertwined with its earliest, most challenging, and ultimately most triumphant chapters. The crucible of early life, a search for meaning in a fractured land. Young Kim entered the world in 1923, a period of deep national humiliation and relentless struggle for the Korean people. Japan's colonial rule, which began in 1910, had systematically stripped Korea of its sovereignty, suppressed its culture, and exploited its resources. For individuals born into this era, the very air they breathed was thick with the weight of oppression, a constant reminder of their subjugated status and the urgent need for national liberation. While the exact details of Kim's early childhood and family background remain largely within the archives of personal memory and tradition, it is understood that he grew up in a Korea where national identity was under constant assault, and the yearning for independence permeated every aspect of life. This tumultuous environment profoundly shaped the generation of Young Kim, imbuing them with a fierce patriotism, a resilience born of perpetual hardship, and a deep introspection that often led to fervent spiritual searching. Like many Koreans of his era, the Kim family likely grappled with the economic hardships imposed by colonial policies. The Japanese regime prioritized its own industrial and military complex, often at the expense of Korean livelihoods, forcing many into destitution or exploitative labor. Education, though deeply valued in Korean culture, was frequently a luxury, with access often limited or heavily influenced by Japanese assimilationist policies. Young men were often pressed into labor or military service by their Japanese overlords, facing conscription into a war machine they did not support. The spiritual landscape of Korea during this time was a complex mosaic, deeply rooted traditional Confucianism and Buddhism intertwined with a burgeoning Christian presence, brought by Western missionaries since the late 19th century. Christianity, for many, offered not only spiritual salvation but also a subtle form of resistance against Japanese Shinto dominance, as well as access to Western education and ideas that promised a way forward for a beleaguered nation. It is plausible that Young Kim, even in his formative years, was drawn to the fundamental questions of existence, purpose, and justice that weighed so heavily on the Korean psyche. The suffering around him, the systemic oppression, the economic deprivation, the erosion of cultural heritage, and the constant threat of violence would undoubtedly have fueled a deeper quest for meaning that went beyond mere survival. While specific anecdotes from his pre-unification life are scarce, one can infer a young man of integrity, perhaps a quiet observer, deeply sensitive to the plight of his people and silently harboring a yearning for a world where peace, justice, and righteousness prevailed. His spiritual instincts would have been sharpened by the surrounding turmoil, pushing him towards deeper contemplation about humanity's condition and God's role in it. The end of World War II in August 1945 brought a brief, ecstatic euphoria to Korea, as the chains of Japanese colonial rule were finally broken. However, this joy quickly dissolved into new anxieties and bitter disappointment. Korea was liberated from Japan only to be divided along the 38th parallel by the victorious Allied powers, setting the stage for an ideological clash between the Soviet-backed North and the American-backed South. This arbitrary division, born of geopolitical strategy, tore families apart and laid the groundwork for future conflict. For someone like Young Wee Kim in his early 20s during this period, these events were not abstract history. They were lived realities, fragmenting his homeland, destroying communities, and forcing profound choices about loyalty, survival, and the very nature of truth. The newly fragile independence quickly gave way to the threat of civil war as ideological tensions escalated. This period of intense uncertainty culminated in the devastating Korean War, 1950 to 1953, which plunged the peninsula into a fresh abyss of bloodshed, destruction, and unspeakable suffering. Millions perished, entire cities were leveled, and the trauma of division was indelibly seared into the national consciousness. For a generation that had already endured so much, the war compounded their sense of despair and desperation. Traditional societal structures had crumbled, established belief systems struggled to provide adequate answers to the scale of human suffering, and the promise of a peaceful, unified nation seemed more distant than ever. It was in this desperate, searching atmosphere, a landscape littered with physical ruins and spiritual yearning, that many Koreans turned to new spiritual expressions. The fertile ground of post-war disillusionment and fervent hope became the birthplace of numerous new religious movements. Those who had endured so much were often open to radical solutions, to profound revelations that promised not just personal salvation but national and global healing. The desperate state of the world seemed to demand a new divine intervention, a fresh word from God. It was into this crucible of desperation and fervent spiritual seeking that Reverend Sun Myung-moon, himself a spiritual seeker who had endured imprisonment and persecution in North Korea for his beliefs, began to articulate a new vision, a new understanding of God's providence and humanity's destiny. Young Wee Kim's journey towards this vision would soon begin, marking the true turning point of his life. His individual search for meaning was about to intersect with a collective spiritual awakening, altering the course of his existence forever. 2. The encounter, a prophetic voice and a receptive heart. The exact circumstances of Young Wee Kim's first meeting with Reverend Sun Myung-moon are not widely detailed in public records, reflecting the intensely personal and often private nature of such profound spiritual encounters. However, its impact on his life was evidently profound and irreversible, rerouting his entire existence. By the late 1940s, Reverend Moon, having been imprisoned in the brutal Hungnam labor camp in North Korea for his religious activities and miraculously surviving its inhumane conditions, had made his arduous way south to the chaotic, refugee-swollen city of Busan. This port city, a temporary capital during the Korean War, was teeming with displaced people, each carrying their own burden of loss and searching for hope amidst the ruins. It was there, amidst makeshift shelters crafted from cardboard and scavenged materials, and the grinding poverty of war survivors, that he began to gather a small but intensely dedicated following, sharing his unique theological insights and a prophetic understanding of human history and God's will. Reverend Moon's message was startlingly unconventional yet deeply resonant with the spiritual hunger of the time. He spoke of a God who was not distant or merely judgmental, but a God who suffered from humanity's fallen state, a God who yearned for a world of true love, peace, and ideal families. He articulated a path for human beings to restore their original purity, fulfill their true purpose, and ultimately establish God's kingdom on earth. His was not a gospel of easy solace or superficial comfort. Instead, he demanded profound self-reflection, absolute dedication, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the sake of a larger divine purpose, for the liberation of God and the salvation of humanity. His teachings, later systematized as the divine principle, provided a comprehensive worldview that addressed the paradox of good and evil, the meaning of history, the nature of human suffering, and the ultimate destiny of humanity, questions that plagued the minds of post-war Koreans. For someone like Young Wee Kim, who had witnessed firsthand the depths of human depravity unleashed by war and the fragility of life, this profound message likely struck a chord with his deepest longings for truth, justice, and a lasting peace. Many who first encountered Reverend Moon were initially skeptical, even resistant. His claims were audacious, bordering on blasphemy for some established Christians. His demands were absolute, challenging all conventional ambitions, and his demeanor was often stern, reflecting the immense burden he carried as one chosen by God. Yet there was an undeniable spiritual authority about him, a profound sense of purpose, an unshakable conviction, and a boundless, sacrificial love that transcended superficial appearances. His words carried an unusual power, penetrating the hearts of those who sincerely sought truth. It's believed that Young Wee Kim was among the very earliest individuals who recognized the extraordinary nature of Reverend Moon's mission and the profundity of his revelation. Perhaps he was drawn by the sheer spiritual power emanating from Reverend Moon's presence, an undeniable force that spoke to his spirit. Or perhaps it was the clarity and coherence of the divine principle itself, which offered a compelling and satisfying framework for understanding the chaos and suffering of the world, providing answers where traditional faiths seemed to fall short. What is certain is that his encounter was not merely an intellectual ascent to a new philosophy. It was a deeply spiritual experience, a profound recognition in his heart of the ultimate truth being spoken, an epiphany that resonated with his deepest longings. He saw in Reverend Moon not just a teacher, but a true parent, a spiritual guide chosen by God to lead humanity back to its original, ideal state. In Reverend Moon, he found the living embodiment of God's heart and God's plan. The decision to follow Reverend Moon was not an easy one. In fact, it was a radical choice that demanded everything. It meant giving up conventional aspirations for a stable life, abandoning societal norms, and embracing a life of intense hardship, ridicule, and often outright persecution. The nascent unification movement was utterly marginalized and profoundly misunderstood, frequently labeled as a cult, dangerous new sect, or even communist sympathizers by a suspicious government and a fearful public. Its followers were outcast from mainstream society. Their families often disowned them, perceiving their new faith as a betrayal, and they faced constant suspicion, hostility, and even violence from authorities and the general public. Yet, for Young Wee Kim, the spiritual conviction must have been overwhelming, silencing all external doubts and internal fears. He chose to throw his lot in with this small, often beleaguered group, believing with every fiber of his being that he had found the ultimate truth and the true purpose of his life, a purpose far greater than any personal comfort or worldly success. This pivotal moment marked his profound spiritual rebirth and the beginning of a lifelong, unwavering devotion to Reverend Moon and his divine mission. It was a choice that would define the rest of his existence. 3. The arduous path of a pioneer. Building the foundation. The early 1950s were a period of unimaginable hardship and fervent spiritual labor for Reverend Moon and his first disciples, including Young Wee Kim. The Korean War, erupting in June 1950, further exacerbated the already dire situation, transforming an unstable nation into a landscape of utter devastation. Yet, paradoxically, the shared experience of extreme adversity forged an unbreakable bond among the small group of believers. They followed Reverend Moon from Busan, where the movement unofficially began, to Daegu, and then to the war-ravaged city of Seoul, which was gradually being rebuilt. They lived in conditions of extreme poverty, often in makeshift dwellings crafted from scavenged materials, or in cramped, rented rooms, sharing meager meals and dedicating every waking hour to intense prayer, in-depth study of the unfolding divine principle, and rudimentary evangelism. Young Wee Kim quickly became one of the bedrock figures of this foundational period. His dedication was not merely passive. It manifested in tireless practical work, a physical expression of his spiritual commitment. He was among those who physically helped construct the first rudimentary church buildings, often using discarded materials like mud, wood scraps, and rubble, brick by painful brick. This wasn't just construction. It was an act of profound faith, a tangible expression of building God's kingdom on earth, starting from the humblest, most challenging beginnings. Each nail hammered, each stone laid, was an offering of Jong-Som, absolute sincerity and devotion. Life for these early pioneers was a perpetual test of faith and endurance. Hunger was a constant companion, gnawing at their resolve, while the harsh Korean winters brought cold that penetrated to the bone. With inadequate shelter and warmth, they faced relentless public scorn and hostility. They were often pelted with stones, mocked in the streets, and ostracized by their communities. Authorities, suspicious of any group that deviated from established religious norms, frequently harassed and arrested Reverend Moon and his followers, often under false pretenses. Young Wee Kim witnessed firsthand Reverend Moon's own suffering and resilience, his unwavering commitment despite multiple imprisonments, torture, and constant threats to his life. This shared experience of intense persecution and profound sacrifice only deepened young Wee Kim's resolve and solidified his conviction in the divine nature of their mission. What sustained young Wee Kim and others like him through these seemingly insurmountable trials? It was primarily the spiritual power, profound vision, and absolute conviction of Reverend Moon himself. He instilled in them a revolutionary understanding of their existence, that they were not merely war refugees or downtrodden Koreans, but chosen instruments of God, participating in a cosmic drama of restoration and redemption. They believed they were literally helping God mend a broken world, that their personal sacrifices were not in vain, but were contributing to a future of true love, peace, and righteousness for all humanity. This profound sense of purpose, this conviction that they were at the vanguard of God's providence, transcended all personal comforts and fears, giving meaning to every hardship. Young Wee Kim's role during this phase was manifold and essential. He was first and foremost a diligent student of the divine principle, delving into its complex tenets with an earnest and open heart, seeking to understand God's will and the true meaning of history. He was a fellow laborer, contributing his physical strength to the practical needs of the nascent community, whether it was clearing land, fetching water, or preparing meager meals. He was also an evangelist, sharing the new truth with others, often facing rejection and hostility, but occasionally finding receptive hearts who were drawn by the power of the message, would join their ranks and swell the numbers of the struggling movement. His steadfastness during these early, volatile years was critical. In a movement that demanded everything, his quiet resolve, consistent effort, and unshakable belief provided a much-needed foundation of stability. By the mid-1950s, despite ongoing persecution and the scars of war, the movement began to slowly but surely grow. The first official church, The Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity was formally founded in Seoul in 1954. Young Wee Kim was undoubtedly there, a silent witness and an active participant in this historic moment, marking a significant step from a scattered group of believers to an officially recognized, albeit still marginalized, religious organization. From a handful of disciples, the community slowly expanded, attracting individuals from diverse backgrounds, students, professors, artists, and ordinary citizens, all drawn by Reverend Moon's charismatic leadership, his profound love, and the comprehensive depth of his teachings. Each new convert was a small but significant victory against the tide of opposition and misunderstanding. Each new meeting place or building was a testament to their collective tenacity and faith. Young Wee Kim was not known for grand pronouncements or charismatic sermons, but for his reliable presence, his disciplined life, and his quiet inner strength. He embodied the core values of the movement: absolute faith in God and Reverend Moon, unwavering loyalty, sacrificial love for humanity, and a ceaseless, diligent effort to realize God's will on earth. He was a living example of how to persevere through adversity, how to uphold one's convictions in the face of overwhelming opposition, and how to build a lasting legacy through humility, hard work, and unflagging spiritual determination. The experiences of the 1950s forged him into an unbreakable pillar, ready to confront the challenges and seize the opportunities that the decades to come would bring, ensuring the survival and future growth of the divine principle. 4. Expanding horizons, roles in a growing movement 1960s to 1970s. As the 1960s dawned, the unification movement, though still comparatively small by global standards, had begun to solidify its presence in Korea and earnestly contemplate its international mission. Reverend Moon, having meticulously laid the spiritual and organizational groundwork through years of suffering and teaching, now began to dispatch his most trusted and dedicated disciples to various parts of Korea and eventually overseas. Young Wee Kim, having proven his absolute loyalty, practical capabilities, and unshakable perseverance during the grueling foundational years, was increasingly entrusted with significant responsibilities, although his specific roles often remained behind the scenes, reflecting his humble and service-oriented nature. One of the critical developments during this period was the establishment of various auxiliary organizations and projects designed to propagate the divine principle and implement its ideals in society. These initiatives included educational programs, cultural projects, and eventually nascent business ventures aimed at generating self-sufficiency and financial independence for the growing church. Young Wee Kim's practical skills, meticulous approach, and disciplined work ethic likely made him an invaluable asset in areas requiring careful organization, diligent administration, and steadfast execution. He was often involved in the logistical and administrative aspects that enabled the expansion of the church's increasingly diverse activities, ensuring that resources were managed wisely and projects were completed efficiently. While other disciples might have been at the forefront of direct evangelism, public speaking, or theological discourse, young Wee Kim likely played a crucial role in managing the burgeoning infrastructure of the church. This could have involved overseeing the maintenance and construction of new church centers, managing the allocation of limited resources, or supporting the administrative needs of the growing community of members and their families. These roles, though less visible to the public eye, were absolutely essential for the movement's sustained growth. Without dedicated individuals attending to the operational backbone, the finances, the property, the day-to-day needs, no movement, no matter how spiritually potent, can effectively sustain itself or expand its reach. Young Wee Kim was a vital part of this operational core, ensuring that the wheels of the movement continued to turn smoothly and efficiently. The 1960s also marked the tentative but significant beginning of the Unification Church's international outreach. Reverend Moon himself began global tours, visiting numerous countries to lay the spiritual foundation for a worldwide movement. Simultaneously, a handful of intrepid missionaries, embodying immense courage and faith, were dispatched to Japan, the United States, and Europe, often with little more than their conviction, a few copies of the divine principle, and an abundance of hope. While young Wee Kim primarily remained in Korea, his consistent and dedicated efforts at the home base were crucial in supporting these nascent international endeavors. Maintaining a strong, stable, and self-sufficient spiritual and organizational foundation in Korea was paramount for effectively launching and sustaining the ambitious global mission. He was part of the collective effort that nurtured the spiritual home from which the international seeds could be sown and sustained. The 1970s witnessed a dramatic acceleration of the Unification Church's global expansion, particularly in the United States and Japan, where thousands joined the movement. Reverend Moon relocated his base of operations to the United States for significant periods, delivering powerful public speeches, organizing enormous rallies, and engaging in extensive outreach efforts to educate and inspire the American public. Back in Korea, young Wee Kim continued his dedicated service, often shouldering greater responsibilities as the movement's needs multiplied. It was a period of intense activity, requiring even greater commitment, adaptability, and the ability to manage complex organizational demands. During these decades, young Wee Kim's exemplary character traits continued to shine brightly. His humility meant he sought no personal glory, always prioritizing the will of Reverend Moon and the welfare of the burgeoning movement above any personal recognition or advancement. His discipline was manifest in his unwavering adherence to the rigorous lifestyle expected of early members, including early morning prayers, intense study sessions, and tireless work, often extending late into the night. Above all, his loyalty to Reverend Moon was absolute, a testament to his profound spiritual conviction and his understanding of Reverend Moon's unique role in God's providence. He was a man who understood patience and perseverance, knowing that the grand vision of God's kingdom on earth would not be realized overnight but required sustained, diligent effort over generations. He would have witnessed the joy of new converts embracing the divine principle, the heartbreak of those who, for various reasons, left the movement, and the continuous external pressures, misunderstandings, and often malicious accusations that plagued the Unification Church globally. Through it all, his steadfastness provided a constant, calming presence, a reassuring anchor in turbulent times. He was a reliable hand, a trusted confidant to those around him, and a silent observer of history unfolding before his eyes. His life during these decades was a living embodiment of the Jong Song, devotion and sincere effort, that Reverend Moon so emphasized, a quiet but profoundly powerful force that contributed immensely to the unification movement's enduring strength, its moral fiber, and its eventual global reach. He was not a distant figurehead, but an integral, active participant in the daily struggles and triumphs of an expanding spiritual family, leaving an indelible mark on the movement's evolving identity. 5. A life of enduring service, wisdom, steadfastness, and legacy, 1980s onwards. As the unification movement matured through the 1980s and into the new millennium, young Wee Kim gradually transitioned from the intense, demanding physical labor and practical administration of the pioneer phase to roles that increasingly leveraged his profound experience, his unwavering wisdom, and his deep understanding of Reverend Moon's heart, vision, and mission. He became, in essence, an elder statesman, a revered patriarch, and a living bridge to the foundational spirit of the movement. While specific high-profile titles might not always have been attached to his name in the public sphere, his influence was deeply felt through his consistent presence, his quiet counsel, and his embodying the very virtues that defined the early church and continued to inspire its members. By this time, The Unification Church had established a truly global network of organizations, encompassing a vast array of initiatives. Educational institutions like the Unification Theological Seminary, as well as universities, interfaith initiatives like the Universal Peace Federation, business enterprises aimed at economic self-sufficiency, cultural projects promoting arts and media outlets disseminating truth. Reverend Moon's own focus had expanded exponentially, addressing critical global challenges, from peace in the Middle East to overcoming communism, and fostering interreligious harmony and reconciliation on a scale never before attempted. Young Wee Kim's role, like many of the earliest disciples, increasingly involved supporting Reverend Moon's broader initiatives, often from a leadership position within the Korean Church, or as an esteemed advisor providing invaluable historical context and spiritual insight. His wisdom, honed through decades of struggle, sacrifice, profound observation, and deep spiritual discipline, would have been invaluable. Younger generations of leaders and members, grappling with the complexities of a rapidly evolving global movement, would look to him for guidance, for anecdotes from the austere and often miraculous early days, and for a living example of what absolute faith and loyalty to Reverend Moon truly entailed. He was a repository of the movement's foundational history, not just narrating facts, but conveying the spirit, the sacrifices, the challenges, and the profound love that animated its beginnings. His very presence served as a constant, gentle reminder of the purity of purpose and the depth of conviction that had characterized the movement from its very inception. He was a guardian of the heart of the movement. One could imagine him participating in various solemn ceremonies, quietly offering heartfelt prayers, and reflecting on the incredible journey from the humble Pusan shack, the first church, to the sprawling global reach of the unification movement, impacting millions around the world. He would have witnessed the historic mass blessing ceremonies, symbolizing the hope for a world of true families united under God, and the countless interfaith dialogues, striving tirelessly for global unity and peace. Each milestone, each step towards the realization of Reverend Moon's vision, would have resonated deeply within him, affirming the truth and ultimate triumph of the divine providence he had committed his life to decades earlier. Challenges, however, did not cease as the movement grew and gained prominence. The Unification Church continued to face intense scrutiny, persistent misunderstandings, and often outright opposition and hostility from various quarters. Young Wee Kim, having endured the severest forms of persecution in the early days, would have brought a perspective of profound resilience, unwavering faith, and calm determination to these ongoing struggles. He would have been a voice of steadfast courage, reminding others of the greater purpose and the ultimate victory promised by God's providence, urging them not to lose heart. His unshakable stability and endurance became a source of strength for the entire community, a steady anchor in turbulent seas. His personal life, while largely private and humble, would have undoubtedly reflected the unification ethos of dedicated family life, selfless community service, and communal living, always centered on God and the profound teachings of Reverend Moon. His children and grandchildren would have grown up with the living, breathing example of a man who truly dedicated his entire life to a cause far greater than himself, instilling in them a priceless legacy of faith, sacrifice, and service. He passed on values not through lectures alone, but through his very way of life. Young Wee Kim, as a venerable elder, deeply embodied the core unification concept of Hyojong, filial piety towards God and true parents. His life served as an unparalleled testament to this principle, demonstrating what it meant to live a life of absolute devotion to God, expressed through his unwavering loyalty, sincere love, and selfless service to Reverend Moon, whom he recognized as the true parent of humanity. His quiet dignity, his profound spiritual depth, and his consistent commitment to the divine principle made him a revered figure within the movement, even if not always widely known to the broader public. His legacy is not merely in the specific tasks he performed or the organizational positions he held. It is in the enduring spirit he represented. He was a foundational stone, a living witness to the profound spiritual transformation brought about by Reverend Moon's message. He represented the faithful, suffering, yet ultimately triumphant heart of the early movement, the unwavering commitment that made the impossible possible. In an age often characterized by fleeting loyalties, cynical detachment, and a hunger for instant gratification, young Wee Kim's life stands as a powerful counter-narrative, a story of unwavering faith, profound sacrifice, and a lifelong dedication to the grand vision of a peaceful, unified world under God. His life was a silent sermon, a powerful testament to the enduring human capacity for devotion and the transformative power of a truly spiritual path.